Hello, everyone. My name is Nia Seville, and today we are going to talk about how you can do your edTPA swiftly, efficiently, and without going crazy. This is also CalTPA friendly, so I won't be discussing the CalTPA in detail too much, but you will see in a couple slides that what I'm going to do is give you an equivalency sheet, and you can kind of follow along that way. Since the edTPA and the CalTPA are both made by Pearson, a lot of the setup and requirements are similar, but just keep that in mind. I am going to be talking about the edTPA. So let's get into it. I highly recommend get cozy, get a blanket, some coffee, tea, a matcha, relax. Watch this in segments if it's too intense because we're going to go for a while. I might even stop and start to get through this. And please do know many of you are very stressed right now, but one, you're in good hands. I've I've helped you guys with this for so many years now. And two, there's nothing that's going to stop you on your teaching journey but you. And now that you're here, I'm not going to let you fail, and I'm not going to let you prevent yourself from teaching. Does that make sense? So a little bit more about myself. I feel like it would be helpful for you guys to know about the person that's guiding you through this journey. So I'm the owner of Glow Education, and I'm a multi-credentialed or multi-licensed teacher. I know in California they go by the term credentialed, and then other states they go certification, licensed. I have multiple, basically. Early childhood, elementary, general, special ed, bilingual Spanish as well. I've been doing TPA mentorship since about 2018. And as crazy as that sounds, I've loved helping future teachers thrive and we have a 100% pass rate because I love being able to help you all understand what you need to do to get to the next step in your journey. So before we continue, just so you know, I'm going to be offering plenty of YouTube videos. I've been doing this for so long, but because the work has been so intensive, I haven't made a lot of videos or printable worksheets and things like that. But I figure it might be good, so we're going to be doing more of that. Mostly what I offer, at least as of right now, is one-to-one coaching, either from myself or from my team of coaches as well. And all of my coaches are licensed teachers, former school principals, and they're also former edTPA scorers. So I think that's really cool to have your portfolio reviewed or work side by side with someone that has literally scored hundreds, if not thousands of these. We help you every step of the way, whether it's your edTPA, CalTPA, Eureka, your national boards, you need help with classroom management, preparing for your observations. We do it all. So on this next slide, just for funsies, I want you to see that you guys also will be one of these. See this? I passed, I passed, I passed, I passed. You will be one of that. Even if you think it's absolutely impossible, I've yet to really see an instance where someone has an extenuating circumstance that's so intense that they can't get through this. So again, the tips and pointers that I give for the most part are interchangeable. It's up to you to make sure that if you have CalTPA, that you're aware of what your specific requirements are. That being said, a lot of this, again, will be very switchable, and the basis and the principles are very much going to be the same. So just throwing that out there. Also, because teacher style, I have so many tabs open. Please forgive me if this lags a tiny, tiny bit. And this is the last thing I'll mention CalTPA wise, you do have the CalTPA and you want to see the equivalents as we go through this, you have this image here. You can also go to this link and just type it in straight, and it'll bring you to a list of the equivalents that I made for you all. Of course, please keep in mind that things might change from year to year, but again, this is really good if you're entirely lost and you want a good base. So we're going to go through this part by part, step by step. If you're like, well, wait, is she going to cover? Yes. We're going to cover edTPA wise, task 1, task 2, task 3, optional task 4. We're going to cover the different ways that this could look for certain different portfolios and how to interpret that based on what you have, as well as submitting. And again, failure is not an option. That might sound like a bit of a cliche statement, but even with clients that I work with, some of you guys come to me and you're so stressed. You're on the verge of tears. I get it. Listen, I've seen it all at this point over the past however many years, 6, 7 years. I don't even let my clients talk about failure because you're not going to. We're not even thinking about failure. only passing. So with the pre-planning process, a lot of you are wondering how long or short the process can or will be. I'll honestly say that it's really up to you. If you want to get this done within a month, and I think that's a very solid time frame, you can do it. I actually don't recommend dragging this process out because it's so intensive that if you're dragging it out, it might be difficult for you to start and stop again, or stop and start again, right? And that can be, and there's no judgment. I get it because I've seen this all the time. Life gets crazy, teaching gets crazy. You are doing your portfolio, you stop, and then you don't touch it for a year later. I recommend powering through this. People that work with me know I can almost be very kindly militant because I'm very much like, we have to keep going. There's no stopping. And I want you to treat it like that for yourself as well. Don't rush, but this is not the process where you want to be so in your head that you're starting and stopping, starting and stopping. Get something done. Even if it's not perfect, at least keep working and creating because it's a lot easier to revise afterwards than struggle to even start. And just as an aside, right? It's okay if you're not the best writer. A lot of people freak out about that and they don't work. I truly just want you to work and write. Get something in, get something down. Again, it is a lot better to revise and edit than to never start at all. Now, if you're on a time crunch, and I've seen it, you can get this done. I won't say that you won't, and I'm not. I've seen respectfully other people say, like, how dare you even think you can get it done in a week? If you need to get it done in a week, you can get this done in a week. There's nothing, it's not easy, right? Or it might not be fun, but whatever time frame you give yourself, especially with support, you can do it. I've had some of you come to me, and I don't let people do this often with me, but they're like, listen, I will do whatever we can. I'm totally fine with us doing a lot and just knocking this out in a couple of days. And we do it, right? That works better though. And I'm not saying this just to say it, more so if you have like a bit of support, guidance, resources, whether it's paper resources, whether you have a sort of plan or something to go along with, or you've watched this and you feel very, very, very secure with what you're doing. If you're extremely stressed, I do not recommend trying to get this done quickly because it's easier for you to make mistakes. But I like the idea of having this done within a month, 5 weeks, a week to a week and a half per task. If you wanted to stretch this out, then do 2 weeks per task, right? But I don't really think it needs to take much longer than that. And this is no stress to you if it has taken longer. I'm saying if you need a bit of courage, you can get this done within whatever time frame you want. Now, you do need to submit within the proper scoring window that you desire, right? You can submit anytime, but when you get your scores back is very dependent on the window that you submitted in. And I'll show you an example of that. You will never, ever get your scores back early. So if you're submitting in conjunction with your university, sometimes they'll give you your scores the morning of, right? And then Pearson will give you your scores at 10 p.m. Eastern or 7 p.m. Pacific time, right? Just about. Other than that, though, you're not going to get your scores back a day early, a week early. Whatever day they say you get your scores on is the day you'll get your scores on. And you will, on the day that you're supposed to receive your scores, get an email typically, or the day of or the night before, from Pearson stating, your scores are coming. Your scores are coming. You're not going to get your scores in that exact email. You'll get your scores again at the end of the night. So my top tip that I want you all to remember, if you remember nothing else regarding doing your edTPA or your TPAs in general, I want you to explain everything. Explain it though where it makes sense. So this is not your context for learning. This is not where, and we'll get to that. This is not where you over explain when they're asking you, like, describe your classroom, right? When we get to the commentaries, and you'll see those, that's where you want to go in depth. You don't want to just say what you did. Why? Why did you do this? Why do you think your students did a certain thing or responded a certain way? You want to explain strategies, objectives, how everything connects. The lack of why is what loses you points about 99% of the time. That is what I see people really struggle with. They do a lot of listing, and you shouldn't have bullet points or anything in your TPA, but they do a lot of listing in paragraph form. So it's a lot of what's first I did this, then I did this, then I did this, then I did this. And then you're told, okay, well, you need to explain more. So then you go, well, I also did this, this, and this. You actually have to explain the what, the why, sorry, the why, the reasoning, the rationale, because your scorers are looking to see that you understand what it means to teach and the different methodologies that you're using. You're not just going up in front of the classroom and, flailing your arms around, you know what you're doing, right? So that's why they want that. This has nothing to do with how well you write, but your ability to, again, explain yourself and back yourself up. Also, please do get cozy. We're going to be here for a while. I'm literally chilling right now, as you guys can see, because this takes a lot to go through. So do what you can and relax. This is an example of score reporting window. So I have this box blocked off because the time I did a workshop on this presentation, I didn't want anyone to get confused, so I blocked off the earlier dates. So when you go on the Pearson website, or you can Google this and search edTPA, score reporting window or score reporting dates. You can also search this for other Pearson things like the CalTPA, the RICA, etc. It'll show you what day you need to submit your scores by in order to receive your scores. So this is a window, right? Let's see, the day that I'm recording this is February 18th. So February 13th has already passed. If I were to have submitted February 13th, I would get by February 13th, I would get my scores back by March 6th, on March 6th. So I'm going to say that again, because I know I chopped up my words. Someone that would have submitted on here, February 13th, by that day, would get their scores back on the column on the left, March 6th. Now, because it's February 18th, okay, I missed this window here, this cutoff. February 18th is by or before March 6th. So this is the cutoff. This is the window that I'm in. So I could submit, if I had my portfolio ready, I would submit it today. I could submit it tomorrow. Whatever day I submit it by, since it's after the 13th, as long as it's by the 6th, everyone in that window would get their scores back on this day here, March 27th. Say, okay, man, I couldn't submit it by March 6th. I have to submit it on March, but I am ready to submit it on March 8th. Cool. You would get your scores back with everyone that has the March 20th cutoff. You would get your scores back with everyone that has that March 20th cutoff, and you would receive it on April 10th. So you read it from right to left. I kind of don't like that they do that, but that's it. You'll see there's typically 2 big gaps. So given that the majority of the states finishes school by like the 1st or 2nd week of June, although if you're originally from New York, like I am, I'm not recording this in New York, but if you're originally from like New York, New Jersey, something like that, a lot of you guys up there don't finish school until the end of June. Because most of you guys do finish school by the end of May or early June, that's why the last cutoff date for the summer basically is June 5th for 2025. And then it's similar each year, right? Like a similar version. And then it skips 2 months for August 7th, right? So you could still submit June 20th, July 1st, August 1st. That's fine. Just know that you won't get your scores back until August 28th. And then typically it'll do it again. So what it'll often do is there will be no, I think there's like no September submission date typically. And then anyone that misses August can't get their scores back until like, I think it's October or something around then. So just keep that in mind for those of you that are watching this a bit later in the year, right? You do have that. Okay. Awesome. I totally forgot I put this in here. CalTPA, you guys are similar. Your dates aren't the same as the edTPA, but you can still kind of see there's a bit of that gap for the summer. You read it from right to left. Submit by one day you get your scores back 3 weeks later. And typically, just regarding the edTPA, the day that you get your scores back, not typically, it's always a Thursday. So let's get into how to actually do the work that you need to do. Before you begin anything, I highly, highly recommend that you set up Google Drive folders. Anyone that works with me has to have folders. I literally will be on Zoom and I'm like, pause, we're making the folders right now. I'll make them for you. Like, please have folders. Now, please keep your folders online, like something that's connected to the cloud, right? I've seen it even in 2025, and if you're watching this later, 2026, whatever it is, I've seen this present day. There's always people that do this where they store their documents entirely on their computer, but it's like not connected to a cloud. Like their most precious edTPA documents are just sitting there, and all it takes is your computer to crash and you don't have your edTPA anymore, right? So don't do that. Even if you're uncomfortable with using Google Drive and Google Docs, if you're uncomfortable with using, what is the Microsoft equivalent, like Microsoft Office, get comfortable. I have nothing else to say about that. Figure it out and get comfortable. It is extremely silly to not have such like precious work backed up just because you don't want to spend 5 minutes figuring out how to use Google Drive. Figure it out. Even if you're like, okay, well, like my templates don't match up all the way. Sometimes when you convert your documents, a PDF over to Google Drive, occasionally, if you don't click the right buttons, it might mess up a little bit. Type them anyway, and then you can figure out how to put them back into the original template to make them all pretty at the end. But we want your work to be there and stay there. So I recommend having setting up the folders and naming it by task. You don't even have to put the word final in there. And when I eventually hop off the presentation to show you guys samples, you'll see, I believe you should see the difference. What some people do is as they're working, they'll have task 1, task 2, task 3, maybe task 4 for folders. And then they will, when they're finished or finalized, if they want to like turn everything into PDFs, which I recommend, then they make new folders and rename that. And they'll name it task 1 final and put the final documents in there so nothing gets confused. So everyone should do that. None of you are exempt. I don't care how organized you think you are. There are a lot of documents for the edTPA. Please, for reasons that are deeper than it might seem, be organized, have everything connected to the drive, and make your folders. Now, I also, of course, want you to figure out your handbook, right? I can't figure out your handbook for you. The handbook you choose depends on you. A lot of universities don't tell you guys that you can, to a degree, pick what edTPA portfolio you do. So that is an option. You're not always barred to one specific type of portfolio. Now, obviously, if you're teaching secondary history, right, you don't have any other choices for portfolio. But especially for like the elementary candidates, I've seen you guys have some leeway whether you do elementary math with task 4 literacy, elementary literacy with task 4 math, the inverse and things like that. Even early childhood, I've seen some of you flip back and forth over which one you want to do. If that doesn't apply to you, don't even think about it. Just pick the first one you want to pick. None of them are, that's a lie. There are a couple that are a bit not easier, but make a bit more sense than others, but pick whatever you connect with the most. All right, so this is an example of like what it would look like inside your folders when you make them. This is what is this? This is a task 4 for an elementary candidate. She did elementary literacy with task 4 mathematics. And you can see at the end, you don't have to have specific file names in terms of like requirements for Pearson. We have the file names very clearly laid out just so we don't get them confused. But when you're submitting, it's totally fine with how you decide to label them. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. So you can see we clearly labeled each one. And the cool part is when you label them in order, it puts itself in order. Part A, part B, part C. Right, because we put the word updated down here, it took it out of order. So part D is here, right? And you can see that they're all PDF. So once everything was finished, we turned them into PDFs to finalize them. Okay, now the reason why I'm showing you this first, and this is from your handbook, this is I believe you can find this towards the end of your edTPA handbook, but it might also be scattered out throughout the middle as well. The reason why I'm showing you this now is because I think it's very important for you to know what segments or what documents you will need for each segment. So we're going to break this down so then that way you're very clear in what you need to do for each or what you will need to do and what your expectations are and how you can kind of navigate this going forward. So no matter what your handbook is, you're going to have an evidence chart. This, for example, is for an elementary literacy candidate. And we want to know exactly what documents are for task one, right? So look at this over here where it says what to submit. These are, just like you saw on the page before, all of the different documents that you'll be submitting. If it's not included here, you don't need to submit it. For example, some of you are like, well, what about permission slips? If it's not included here, you don't need to submit it. And you actually don't need to submit permission slips ever. That's just more so for your legal coverage. And then once everything is said and done, you can just get rid of them. So for example, look at this here where it says where did my pointer go? There we go. Look at this here where it says the context for learning, right? This says template provided. So it gives you a template, meaning you must use it. But then if you see here, lesson plans, instructional materials, assessments, those don't say that. So that means that you have to fit this requirement here for the length of the lessons, like the page length and things like that. But you can set it up any way you want, as long as, of course, it makes sense. So things like specific font, margins, those are for the documents that they give you. They do not want you tampering with the templates that they provide you. Font, you don't see that mentioned here for lesson plans, so it doesn't matter. Of course, use something sensible, right? But there's not a strict requirement. I actually don't even know what an ODT document is. Typically, the only documents I see are docx and PDF. Only I think the older Word programs, I could be wrong, so let me know, use .doc, but nowadays I'm seeing more docx, and then PDF. So I would recommend sticking only to those two, and then when you finish, going to PDF version anyway. When this says number of files, that quite literally means, think about opening your computer to upload a file. You're only clicking one thing, right? So if it says one file max, that's one click. Actually, all of task one says that, right? So you can have multiple pages, but it has to all be, if it says one, in one document. Now, when we get to task 2 and task 3, that's where there's some leeway and it'll tell you, okay, minimum and maximum. So keep that in mind. When it comes to your lesson plans, when you start doing them, I recommend just writing them all into one lesson anyway, or one document anyway. What I see a lot of you do is you put them all in separate pages to keep track. I don't really get the point, because if you're doing this in Google Docs and you make a big header, it'll separate the header and let you click on it anyway to like automatically bring you to the page you want to go to. So because it's more difficult to combine the 3 lesson plans at the end, I recommend like into one file, just as you're working, do them all at the same time in one file. Okay, and that's pretty much that. So you can find this in your handbook. Now, another thing regarding the handbooks, how do I put this? I'm someone that likes to have you guys work very efficiently. So there's a specific reason, and not everyone might agree with this. I don't really care 100% if you have passed over this past 7 years. I don't really recommend going so deep into looking at every single document and file that Pearson gives you regarding your TPA. I know there's like the making good choices and the URLP and all of those things, and you can look at it to help you make sense of things. But if you can follow this, what I'm telling you very closely and focus on what matters most extensively, there's a lot of things that you won't necessarily need to look into or dive too deep into. I'm not saying those documents and pages are useless. I am saying I'm being realistic, and teaching is intense. Teaching is a lot. And I think it's a bit unfair to tell a teacher like, oh, well, did you check out page 10 of your URLP or you're making good choices? I don't really think that's all the way fair. So we're doing this in the way that's efficient, that'll help you understand the easiest. Task one. The ones that are starred have a pre-made Pearson template, and task one has 5 parts. We're going to go through all of them. This is where it might get a little bit not glitchy, but as I have to kind of go in and out of the presentation to show you guys the actual real document. So there's a chance I might just keep the non-presentation mode on from here on out, even though it doesn't look the prettiest, but just to be aware. So in your context for learning, I want you to keep in mind that all of the students that you mentioned, especially in the charts section, which I will show you, of course, will and should be mentioned in your commentaries, especially regarding task 1 and task 3's commentary. If that's too much for you, take them out. So this is where I tell you guys, do what you need to do to pass and get through with all of this, right? Some of you were like, I have this student in my class and he's never really there and it's always very stressful. Okay, don't write him into your context for learning. I don't care if that sounds like morally correct. Get this done, get it done, get it finished. You have 3 kids that like to totally act up and make everything a nuisance. And you know, when you're teaching, maybe you'll happen to just casually schedule this while they're out or going somewhere else. Go for it. Go for it. I want you guys to have this done and passed. And I see you guys think about this way, or see you all think about this way too much, where you're being like so hyper focused on 1 or 2 students that it throws you off for a lot of your portfolio. Pearson, this is who you're sending your TPA to only knows what you tell them. So just keep that in mind, right? They only know what you tell them. They only know what you show them, right? What else did I want to say before we move on? Oh, your only the commentaries are scored. Everything else, all of the other documents are looked at in relation to your commentaries. They're looked at, they're vetted for quality in terms of making sure that they have no condition codes and errors, right? But only your commentaries are scored. So what I'm saying is this doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to make sense because you're not getting scored on it anyway. And if you are in California, you do have to be more specific with the students that you mentioned in the chart section of your of the context for learning, and we'll see that. It does say 1 student must either be an English language learner, underrepresented, or struggles with academic language. So if you don't have a student that is an English language learner, that's where it says to reference or identify a student with a similar or another type of challenge or need. Again, do what you need to do to get through it and pass. Okay, I think this should be where we pull out a sample. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to show you a sample essential literacy strategy. A sample context for learning. This is where my computer gets a little bit slow. As you can see, I have there's a lot of things going on this computer. So while this loads, actually, there we go. You'll see that the context for learning isn't too intense, right? It goes into enough detail just to let your scorers know what they're dealing with, because that's what your scorers want to see. They want to know exactly what who's in your classroom, so that when they look at your commentaries and eventually they'll look at your videos, etc., they're not going into it blind. So they're going to ask you, again, remember, this isn't scored. Don't overthink this. I want you to do your context for learning in like literally no more than 10 minutes. If you're like, well, I don't know exactly what textbook we use, 10 minutes. Don't get this done in 10 minutes. I promise. This candidate was teaching in elementary school in the city. Actually, I don't know why she put city, because she wasn't in a city, but that's what she put. I'm like, I've been to that area. It's not a city. This question here says, list any special features of your school. This can be, like, for example, when I did my edTPA, and this was like in this was like 7 years ago, whatever the time was. I did it in a school that was an open concept school, and this was a middle school. So I didn't just teach 30 sixth graders, I taught 60. The classrooms were separated by a folding wall, and you can open the folding wall to teach when we would do like combined time. I still don't really know the rationale behind it, although I always love hearing about unconventional teaching methods. So that was something I put. Classroom age, specific learning centers, level groups. Again, this is specifically about your classroom. If there's really cool like learning centers, right? Um, Anything you can add. If you don't have anything and your school is like 100% standard, like it's out of a textbook, that's fine. Just put that there's no special features. Again, you're not being scored on this, and these are things that are out of your control. You're just describing it to give your scores context. This next one is basically the same, but now it's more about the district or the school as a whole, as well as curriculum. So if there's any state tests or standardized tests that are taken, that can be where you put this in this question for question 4. If, let's see, there's something specific regarding like the teachers or the time, I don't want to say timing, anything specific regarding the teachers, specific curriculum that's used, especially for early childhood. I think this is big for a lot of you because you use a lot of specific curriculums. For those of you that are doing this in a private school, that can be something that is also mentioned or mentioned again, and especially any curriculum. If you're in a classroom where it's dual language, right? Or you or the classroom teacher, a second teacher, or you yourself teaches in another language often, you can put that in there as well. When it says how much time is devoted to literacy instruction, this is just for literacy. So think like reading, writing, grammar, right? Within one school day, on average. If you're not sure the exact number, it's fine. The reason why they ask this is because if for some odd reason you had a school that only dedicated like 20 minutes a day, like that would seem a bit like out of the ordinary. Or if you had a school that dedicated 3 hours a day worth, that might be in the other end. They just want to be aware of that. For those of you that are doing secondary history, mathematics, whatever it is, you're teaching high school or you're teaching in classrooms that have periods, your TPA is for one class period. So if your class period for just one class is 40 minutes long, you would write 40 minutes. Doesn't matter how many students you have in your other classes, you're doing this on one class period only. I'm saying this because I've seen it, especially when we get later in this document, where there's some people that are like, I have 90 students. I'm like, not for your edTPA. You're focusing on one class period. When it asks you for question 2, if you have any ability, grouping, or tracking in literacy, this is like if you do, what would I say, like Lexiles basically, or if you have any programs where the students are always like virtual programs, digital programs, where the students are always tracking how they do in literacy to track their reading levels, things like that. You can put that there. Typically, this is 50-50. I see half of you have this and the other half of you don't. So if you have anything, put it. If not, you can just say that there's none. If you have a textbook and you can think of it within the next like couple minutes, put it in there, right? Don't stress. It's not one of those things. This is a document that I really just like you guys having done. So sometimes if people say like, okay, well, it's a Friday, but I'm gonna wait until I get back to class on like Tuesday, whatever, to figure out the textbook. Again, we really don't want to stop and go. Keep it moving. Figure out the textbook if you can remember the name. If the year, again, isn't exactly correct and you thought the textbook year was 2019, but it was actually 2015. Who cares? That's very trivial information. It won't hurt you in any way possible. So don't stress over this too much. If you have any other resources, library, textbook sets, smartboard, right? Students get Chromebooks. You can use this. Now, this isn't about your lessons. This is just about your classroom itself. And if you have none, you can just say that. Grade level. Again, this is for what you're doing for your edTPA in one class period. So secondary, if all of your students in one specific class period of your choosing are in the ninth grade, you would put ninth grade. If in one class period you for some reason have like maybe it's advanced class or whatever, a ninth, mostly ninth graders and a couple 10th graders, that would be where you put that. Um, Other than that, yeah, number of students in your one class, you'll put that there. Oh, and another thing that's worth mentioning, when you have brackets like these here, put your responses in the brackets. They used to be stricter about scoring. Like if your response wasn't in the bracket, they wouldn't take it into account and they wouldn't score it. Now they're a bit more lenient, but please don't delete these. When they give you a bracket, put your whole response in it. If they don't give you a bracket, don't worry about it. This section here is arguably the most important because everything you mention here will be referenced in your commentaries, and they do check and verify that. So this is asking you to identify the different needs of your students in your class, in your one class period. Keep the examples here. Don't delete them if you don't have it. Do make sure that you don't write example in yours because this is an example. It's the real thing. So like, I know it might sound a bit redundant. I'm literally saying every single thing, every possible issue I've seen regarding this. So I'm just making sure it's clear. When it tells you, or when you're writing this, since the examples in italics, don't put your example in italics. You want yours to look very, you want yours to be very straightforward and easily identifiable. So when this says students with IEPs or 504s, it literally means only students with IEPs or 504s. Your students that are unclassified don't count for this. Your students that seem like they might have ADHD don't count for this. Only students with documented IEPs and 504s. And then you would write the supports and accommodations modifications that they would or could receive. Not so much just in general, not so much related to your lessons themselves, because this is supposed to kind of go in order. So even if you're doing this out of order, think about it as if it's following the sequence. Language needs. This can be students that are English language learners. This can be students with some sort of speech delays and things like that. Although occasionally I've seen that also fit in this section up here. So you'll see the teacher didn't have anything for the first category, but she did have a student that only spoke a few words of English and two students that spoke a mix of Spanish and English and were kind of transitioning into the language. So, and then she wrote what those students would receive. Other learning needs. Those are the things that are unclassified regarding, so a thing that's unclassified would be, again, something that you suspect, but maybe don't have that confirmation. Like you're thinking that a student seems to have ADHD. You're not 100% sure. You can't write ADHD here because that's not diagnosed. You can write struggles with attention or hyperactivity, right? Struggling reader, struggling writer, etc. So that is your context for learning. I'm just gonna pre-open the lesson plans. Getting back to the presentation. If it opens. So while this opens, there we go. Now we're gonna get into the lesson plans. So one thing I like to mention with the lesson plans is that I highly recommend doing your best to figure out exactly what would work best for you to get this done in as swift of a manner as possible, right? So the reason why I have this here before the whole lesson plan sheet is that I want you to think about possible strategies that you can use to teach your lesson. Some of you, if you have elementary, and I want to say it's mainly elementary candidates, will have an essential literacy strategy. And that's basically, it is what it sounds like. The essential or key strategy that will help the students comprehend or compose a text. Take a quick look. These are a lot of different ones, so I'm not going to go through it. And you're not limited to these. These are just examples that come from Pearson. Now, getting into your lesson plans themselves. You can do between 3 and 5 lessons. I highly recommend that you only do 3. I've never seen a reason for someone to do 4. Again, if you do you want this done quick, smoothly, and efficiently, or do you want to drag it out? If you want to drag it out, do 5 lessons. Then you have to teach 5 lessons. Remember, everything you do will be written about in your commentaries. Highly recommend doing only 3 lessons. You don't get more points, and we're going to discuss the rubrics in a little bit, but you don't get more points for doing more lessons, right? You're only scored on what's in your rubrics. So there's nothing interpretive about your edTPA in general, right? What they tell you they're scoring is what they're scoring. If they don't say they're scoring it, they're not scoring it or scoring for it. So with your lesson plans, again, I only recommend you do 3. 3 is more than enough. They, by the end, will all be in one document. Regarding the edTPA, you have a max of 4 pages per lesson. Again, that's all stated in your handbook. Please try to keep your standards consistent. I recommend doing only one standard, 1 to 2 max. And standards are the general, they're the general umbrella that your lessons fall under, right? Standard, some people get really, really stressed out. So they pick like 7 standards, or they're thinking, okay, well, I need to cross out this piece in the standard and that piece of the standard because that doesn't match. Or I've seen some people overthink and start crying because they're like, none of the standards match exactly what I'm doing. Why would they? So in case your professors or mentors might not have told you, that's not what standards are. There's no way the people making standards are going to know exactly what you're going to teach and how you'll teach them. There's so many possibilities. The standard is the overall umbrella, and then that allows you to figure out how you fit underneath. So think about what an umbrella concept is. Not everything matches, but it falls under that, right? So keep that in mind. Not every part of the standard needs to match what you're doing. You don't have to connect with the standard perfectly. It needs to be close enough. And of course, your lesson plan should relate to one another. I say this very, how do I put this? I've seen sometimes lessons that do not connect at all, like they're on 3 entirely different topics, and that's not what you're supposed to do. So just to make that very clear. Now, I'm going to show you a sample lesson. She did 3. You can see that's 12 pages because it was a max of 4 pages each. Something else to keep in mind are the templates. There are none, right? You can use whatever you want. You can be as detailed or not detailed as you want. This client was given templates by her school and she felt comfortable using them, so we used them. I have my own template that I give to clients that don't have templates, and it's honestly a lot more basic than this. But there's, again, no such thing as like a super fancy template that's going to get you more points because the lesson plans aren't even scored, and your templates aren't. Your lessons just need to show what you're doing and make sense. So we're going to go through the first one just so you can kind of see what a really solid edTPA lesson looks like. So I'm going to tell you what's essential for you to have and what's optional. Optional, again, doesn't mean you'll get more points. This is just what this person wanted to put in for their own comfort. Grade level, worth having. Number of students. If you're doing elementary, you can put that the learning segment is composition or comprehension. This section here with strategies you're practicing, you don't have to put that unless you kind of wanted to state your essential literacy strategy here early. But you don't have to put that section. And then make sure that at some point here at the top, though, you're naming what lesson you're working with, like lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. Next, I'm going to get a sip of water because this is a lot of talking. I want you to look at your standards. Now focus more on this before you jump here. Ignore that. This is what matters most, the content standard. Your content standard, again, is the standard that matches what you're doing the most, right? This is the standard she chose, and we use the same standard for all 3 lessons, so we don't switch it. She wanted to put ELD standards in hers. I believe for California, it can be useful sometimes if you're in California to mention ELD standards, but you are not required unless you have unless you're doing like an English as a new language portfolio and they're specifically asking you to put in the ELD and WIDA standards. Other than that, you're fine. So that's that. Your central focus is important because this is what the students are learning, not so much what they need to be able to do by the end, but what they're learning, the general topic. In this case, the students were learning how to identify character settings and major key details from a specific fiction story. This sentence here is really the most important. We didn't even need the second sentence. This section where she puts personal, cultural, and community assets, you do not need. Again, it's up to you. What is important now are the learning objectives. These are very important. You mainly need content objectives. So content objectives are what the students need to be able to do by the end of the lesson. And ideally, you can even add in a measurable component. Now, I believe the reason why this client didn't was we put it more so in her commentary, and there was like only one or two main characters and settings, so it kind of was very self-explanatory. But ideally, you can even add in a measurable objective. So that's something like, let's see, students will correctly answer 4 out of 5 questions on the life cycle of a frog, right? So something measurable to lean on. You don't have to put language objectives, but you can if you want. Again, it's not required. Now, language demands. This involves the language function, which is what you'll see in the little chart section of question 4A in your task 1 commentary. You don't have to put this in now. Not all of you even have a language function. If you do have one, like elementary, you guys always do. I actually think I've seen this when I've worked with secondary math. I think they gave you guys a language function. It's very interesting. Secondary history, I know you have a language function. Secondary English, I forget. I've done secondary science. I forget if they had one. Early childhood doesn't. So you'll see based on your handbook. Not everyone has a language function, but if you do, you don't have to put this in your lesson plan. So you also don't have to decide it now. I actually think a lot of people get confused by it. Because this person was working with me so early, we were fine keeping it in. But your language function is like the main underlying skill that the students will need to use and know so that they understand, can carry out the tasks of the lesson. Again, you don't even need to put this in your lesson plan now. You can put supports, right? And these are supports that would help your students with the language that they need to know and understand. So word walls, anchor charts, visuals, sentence starters, dictionaries, things like that. Next we have vocabulary. So you do need this. However, you don't have to go crazy with it. You don't even have to define any of the terms, but if you want to, for like anything major, you can, but you really don't have to. You're naming key terms that your students will need to understand that we can't take for granted so that they can understand the lesson and what you're teaching. These could be words from the story that you're reading, if you're reading the story, words that are very content specific or context specific, and words that relate to the skills that they're learning as well. I would say you don't really need more. We had a couple, but you don't need more than like 10 max. Don't go too hard with this, but do be pretty intentional with it. This right here, discourse and syntax, you are not required to have in your lesson plans. It could be helpful, and for 99% of you, discourse will be, if not 100, honestly, discourse would be what you would focus on anyway. So discourse is the same as discussions in giving your students opportunities to explain themselves, connect with their peers, connect with you, and explain what their thoughts. You can list out opportunities where that could be possible. Syntax is great for grammar or specific concepts that focus on like order. But again, even if you do have that, you don't have to have syntax. This is built more around question four. I want to say like 4C, I could be wrong. 4C in your commentary, but again, you don't even need to have this. You can if you want, just to kind of help you organize your thoughts for the future. And if you do decide to put it, I would just put discourse. You do definitely need to list out your assessments. So you can put it in two ways. You can say formative versus summative. You can say informal versus formal, right? However you feel like doing it. Formative is more for learning. These can be things that you have that'll help you, that will help you understand how well the students are understanding the lesson in real time. Circulating the classroom, doing group activities. Those are things that go in this section. Summatively, that's kind of a summary of learning. That's more cumulative. That's done at the end of a lesson. And this doesn't have to be like a major assessment, right? This is only lesson one. This can be an exit ticket, an independent worksheet, right? So keep that in mind, but you do need to list out your assessments here. She also put, again, this was a pre-made template her school gave her. So she kind of had this filled out. You do not need it. This can also be useful if you wanted to plan. What the expectations were for students of differing academic and language levels. You do need to discuss accommodations and differentiations. If you have students that have IEPs, 504s, English language learners, things that are documented like that, you can list how you would and could accommodate the lesson for them. Keep in mind, even if you're doing this like retroactively, this is all, task one is still supposed to be like future tense. So if you're like, well, I'm doing this retroactively, but like I didn't actually do that accommodation or thing or whatever in my video. Well, first of all, your videos are only a couple minutes long out of an entire chunk of teaching, so they don't cover anything anyway. But second, this is just pre-planning, saying what you could do, what you would do, what you might do, what you know how to do in case of something. You're not expected to pull out every stop when you're teaching. Plus, when does teaching ever go at 100% to plan, right? Now, you do definitely need this, which is your instructional plan, or you can call it instructional plan, instructional strategies, however you put it. I recommend setting up your lessons where you have an introduction, a guided portion, an independent or semi-independent portion, and then a closure. So you'll see we pretty much follow this with one little tweak. Introduction, list out the steps step by step. You can just say the teacher blank. This is the only time where I would recommend you can say the teacher, like when you're doing your commentaries and things like that, you want to say I, right, instead of the teacher. But yeah, just state exactly what'll happen. It doesn't have to go too crazy. Again, this is almost like a plan or a script. Read alouds can be in the guided practice section. You don't have to put them separately. We decided just for funsies to try something a little different and put the read aloud first. Read alouds I've seen for more often than not are included in the guided practice, but it's up to you. So we listed the steps. The independent practice was when the students were doing like their assessment, and closure. We gave the students an exit ticket and discussed. Now, you don't have to like give out something extra in your closure. That can be just reviewing. It could be having your students share what they made or what they drew. That's up to you, right? And differentiation. We listed potential ways that we could support or she listed potential ways that she could support the students differently, depending on their needs. For example, that's for students that are struggling with verbally identifying characters, they can receive a sentence starter, right? Another thing I want to mention is grammar and spelling are not scored on your edTPA. Now, of course, it has to be like legible and make sense, but grammar is not, they can't score you in grammar. Again, they only score you in what's in your rubrics. So then we went on to lesson 2, lesson 3. And if you're wondering how do you make your lessons build, basically your lessons probably like already will, because you wouldn't teach something that wouldn't make sense that your students aren't ready for. In this case, day 1 was more focused on characters. Day 2 was more focused on setting. and day 3 kind of brought that all together. That's one way to build. Another way is to kind of teach all of the things at once, but you give different activities and strategies for how to work with them in each of the 3 days. There's so many different ways. Okay, now we are going to talk about your instructional strategies. Again, bear with me. I know it's being a little slow. I actually think I might take a bit of a break and then re-edit, so that, or a bit of a break, and then edit the video a little bit and clip them together, so that way I can give my computer time to refresh. So your next sections are your instructional materials and your assessment materials section. These are important because they do show what you need to learn, what your students will be working with, right? These are 2 separate sections, but I put them into one slide just because they're basically set up exactly the same. So your instructional materials are done all in one document with a max of 5 pages per lesson for the edTPA. Your assessment materials are done all in one document, but there's no page limit. Although rarely do I see anyone that has a lot to put. When you have your pictures in each document, they do need to be readable. I don't know why, but sometimes I see people just kind of, I don't know, they freak out a little bit. So they take pictures of everything, they add into their document, and they make it so tiny. And it's like, oh, what good is that? You know, no one can read it. So please make sure they are readable, right? Large enough to be seen. So I'll show you guys an example of that. Right? This is so straightforward. Don't stress over it. Lesson 1, these are instructional materials, things that could be used during learning. Sometimes it's very short. You just have a book and a worksheet. That's fine. She had some sentence starters, an anchor chart. What else do we have? These were like picture cards. This was, again, a kindergarten class. We have these cute little picture cards. I think this is repeated. No, or maybe it's different. I forget. But if you use something more than once, you don't have to repeat it more than once. Again, more anchor charts. You get the idea. Now, the assessment materials, right? Let's take a look at that. These are the things that the students are doing on their own, or if you have little ones, or you're teaching in a special ed classroom, semi-independently, right? So if you have other worksheets that the students were doing, but that was like in the guided practice, that goes in the instructional materials document. This was something that these kindergarten students, they had to circle the main character based on the story. And if you're like, wow, that looks so easy, you'd be surprised. There was a kid or two that got confused. This was something that the students did at the end of the lesson. This was like independent to show that they understood what characters were and what was the main character, not secondary, of the book that they read. So, and they also had the opportunity to verbally dictate as well, or write keywords regarding this to differentiate their assessment. This is what they did. That was lesson 1. Okay, and then they also had the illustration as well. And I believe they did a version of this for setting 2. Let's see. They had something similar for setting. Right. Okay. So we are just about ready to get into the commentary. I will say, no matter what portfolio you have, the task 1 commentary is the most intense and it's the least fun. You get done with that, it's a lot more streamlined from here. So I just want to show you a couple things before we get into that. Then we'll do all of the task 1 commentary, and there will be a time jump because I'm going to take a break, and then we'll get into task 2. So this is an example of your rubric. You guys all have rubrics. I just try not to say you guys. You all have rubrics in your handbooks, right? So you all have your specific handbooks, And typically in each handbook, it breaks it down by task. And then after it shows you the, what is it? The commentary, and basically the commentary template and what you need to do for that, the rubrics go after that. The rubric pertains to each question. So like rubric 1 goes for question 1. But you'll notice like where each piece and part kind of matches for each question, right? You'll kind of see like, oh, this, it's showing me the scoring and what's required more so for like 1B and 1C. You get what I'm saying? So one thing I see some people saying is, I just want to pass, so I'm only going to aim for a 3. I would highly recommend not doing that. You want to aim for a 5 and then hope that you get like a 3. If you aim for a 3, you're going to get a 1, because the scoring for your TPAs are very, very, very intense, very intensive, right? So do your best to look at the 4s and 5s, get the 4 as a base, then add in the information that you would need for a 5, right? And this goes again for each question. Now, I'm not the ChatGPT police. I always tell people, do what you need to do to get this done. However, I do task reviews. So with that, you guys are more than welcome to, you send me your tasks. You like go on the website to book. Once you book it, you send me like one of your tasks or all of them, depends on what you book. And you then are able to have me review it, and I go through line by line. I've had some of you, and it's no judgment, who think that ChatGPT is going to be able to write like your whole commentary. The thing with that is, forget the ethics for a second, honestly. In order to have ChatGPT create something that would actually get you points and not get you a 1 on your rubric, you would need to, by default, understand deeply what you're doing. Because the more detail, the more context that you give ChatGPT, the better it works. So if you're stressed and you're struggling and you're like scared out of your mind, and I'm not saying this being mean, I'm saying this being honest, you are not going to be very capable of even telling ChatGPT what to do. And just showing ChatGPT, well, these are the instructions, that's not enough, right? The more specialized any type of project is, the more you need to work with your ChatGPT really, really intensely. You would need to feed it so much, and I've tried this just to see, right? Again, I did my portfolio years ago because I'm a bit nerdy, and anything that comes up, I have to try it out for myself. I have tried this with prompts just to see. You're always going to need to tweak what it gives you. That's just common sense. But to even get it to give you something that is worthwhile and makes sense, I'm not even talking about like plagiarism, like, oh, condition code, but literally just makes sense. You have to feed it so much data. So much data. You need to feed it so many supporting documents. You need to constantly explain to it what it needs to do. You need to keep it on track. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it, right? You have to be so deeply intentional with it. And and I'm going to say this straight, you struggle with expressing, like being very clear in your like written expression, prompting with ChatGPT is not going to be your strong suit, which means telling ChatGPT to respond to an entire question or 2 or 3 is not going to be that that simple. So just because it gives you a whole bunch of words, I've seen it. I called someone out in this last week. I was like, hey, I don't know if you realize this. This thing literally just repeated the same. I can tell you used it because it repeated the same key points over and over again, didn't elaborate, didn't explain. And it's like hyper focusing, which is what it does, without actually meeting the requirements. It's what it did was it basically acted as if it was putting on a performance instead of responding to the questions. So just be careful, because maybe you'll never work with me, maybe you'll never work with my team, whatever. So then that means though, if you were going to use ChatGPT and you're going to pay or whatever else to submit your portfolio if you go to a school that doesn't give you vouchers or anything. Don't waste your money on submitting your portfolio and it literally doesn't meet any requirement that you need. Even if you do get a good response out of ChatGPT, still edit it. The edTPA is one of the most intensive and elaborative portfolios I've ever seen. So CalTP as well. So please be very intentional. Now, we are on to the planning commentary. This is, again, it is the most intensive commentary. I actually kind of recommend people doing it first because I find that it's, how do I put this? I find that it's just very, you can just feel kind of burnt out if you wait, right? So this is all written in the future tense as if you hadn't taught it yet. I know that seems very, very particular, but it's called the planning commentary. So if you're doing this out of order, or if you taught everything first, but you didn't actually do the writing yet, and now you're starting at the commentary, remember, what you did in your videos does not matter here because technically your videos don't exist. Don't delete anything that Pearson provided you in the templates because that's what the templates are there for. Be aware of the brackets, be aware of the page limits. If you go over the page limit, they will not score it, or they will not score anything written over the page limit. That just is what it is. And for all of your commentaries, remember that's what written is what will be scored. I've seen people add like images of their work and things like that, supplementary documents in their commentary. I can't say I necessarily recommend it. Like I don't not recommend it, but I don't think it's as required as it seems. So now let's open up a sample task 1 commentary. And again, even if you're doing a different portfolio, this setup is just about exactly the same. And the level of depth that you need and the things you need to understand are also the same. You all can actively see my computer slowing as we speak. This is so funny. Okay. But in the meantime as well, I do want to say it is very easy to feel discouraged when you're doing your task 1 commentary because you'll feel like you're repeating yourself a lot. That is actually fine. So as long as it's fine if you're repeating a topic, but if your explanation should be somewhat different. So yeah, you might bring up the same thing like 8 times, but you're changing your explanation, your rationale, your justification, depending on the question and what's being asked of you. Does that kind of make sense? So typically for question 1A, all of you should have this, I believe, SPED as well, although watch through this first. If you have a special ed portfolio and you really, there's really not that many changes, but if you guys really want me to do a separate video for SPED, and I might, let me know. But still, just to understand the base, this all still will apply. So it's asking you what your central focus is and the essential literacy strategy, if you have one. Some of you don't have an essential literacy strategy, that's cool. All of you have a central focus. You're describing what you're going to teach. Be very clear. This is not, especially if you do use ChatGPT to, like, I get it if you struggle with writing and then you take what you wrote and you put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you clean this up a bit? Just don't let it give you like the fluffy like intro sentences and outro sentences. You want to be very direct here, direct to the point and give detail. So no fluff. We said the central focus was blank. We said what the students kind of will be doing. We said what the essential literacy strategy was and that the students will be comprehending. If you want as well, you can bold key terms, just actually bold what's relevant. I have seen people bold like every other word. Please don't do that. Now, question 1B, 1A is typically short, 1B is longer. You want to state your standards and state it in detail, like state what the full standard is. Don't just list it. State your standards, restate your learning objectives, right? And how they all connect with each other your strategy, your related skills, and reading and writing. And again, anything similar. I think for secondary history, they'll ask you how it connects with like interpretation, inquiry, analysis. So it's a weird question because you're just naming all of these points and saying how it lets you do each of these things. What I kind of recommend is doing a paragraph or a mini paragraph per bullet point. Yes, that seems like a lot. You will find that this speeds up very quickly. But for some of you, you might also do well if you blend everything, and that works too. Just be aware and make sure that you don't skip anything. So for example, we stated the content objectives and we stated the standard first. And we said that this further supports the standard by encouraging students to use simple language to articulate their understanding with scaffolding such as sentence frames and visual aids to make the story accessible. We mentioned how the students will be expressing themselves, and then we mentioned specific activities. So I get it. Like, there's a lot of stuff and you don't want to mention it. If you're like, well, should I mention this? Should I mention that? This is where you want to go into detail. You don't have to name every activity because that's just not sensible. There's not enough space for it. And that kind of shows that you might be like kind of so stressed that you're not focusing on what you need to per se, and you're focusing on just what's in front of you. So that kind of makes sense. Like if you're honed in, you'll realize like, okay, I can give 3 good examples or 4 good examples instead of 8 wishy-washy examples. So we named specific activities that were in the lesson plans and how that supported reading and writing, how that used the standard, how that supported our related skills. Now, for the elementary candidates, I want to say history. What is it? Secondary English. Quite a few of you have related skills. If you have related skills in your portfolio, these are basically they're similar to what you're focusing on for like the central focus, but they're not. It'll be better if I describe it like this. Because this story structure, I think it froze a little bit. Because story structure was our central focus, come down here, character, setting, key details, that was more of our related skills. So that's like with kind of like in that umbrella. Right. We discussed some key vocabulary in there. A lot of this looks very intense, but the more you work through it, the more it kind of makes sense. Again, you're more than welcome to pause this so you can see this sample in depth, right? You guys get a free sample. The next question is how your lesson plans build on each other. I recommend doing a paragraph per lesson. And with each lesson, you're naming some of the major activities that you're doing, as well as the objective, and how the activities that you're doing prepare you for the next day and for the days forward, how it connects with the day prior, and how that helps the students like kind of build the skills. So for example, on day 1, we're doing this because on day 2, we'll be doing this, and explaining like why that's so important. Always explain why it's important. So this looks intensive, but we really just went into a lot of depth into all of the different ways that each lesson connected with the other. When you're asked in question 2, or question 2 is all about the background of your students. It's less about the specific lesson that you're planning. So please make sure as well to stick to what the question is asking. If you're adding in things that the question isn't asking, this is not where your scores kind of view things in isolation, right? Need more water. So your scores kind of view things in isolation. That being said, this is not where you want to assume that because you mentioned something in 1A that they're going to remember it down in 2A, or assume like, well, I'm just going to mention this as well in 2A because that could kind of like look really cool when I get to question 3. Right? So stick to specifically what they want you to say and don't say what they don't want you to say. This is not interpretive for the edTPA. So in question 2A, they really want you to focus on what your student's background. 2A regards more of like an educational aspect of what they know how to do, what they can do, and what they're learning how to do. You can keep this general and then get into specific skills that they kind of are working on that relate to the lessons. But you're not talking about, oh, this is why I'm going to teach this in my learning segment, because that's what question 3 is about. This is all just speaking about your students. Question 2B, same thing, but now you're talking about your students as children, their background. Are they in clubs? Do they like technology? Are they social? For early childhood, special ed, things like that. What's another portfolio? I almost think history has something similar. I could be wrong. Physical education, you guys have this too, where they will ask you to talk about your students' like dispositions, their attitudes towards math. That's one. Attitudes towards just learning in general, their socialization. So for those of you that have portfolios like that, you also want to be specific in saying what are their dispositions. Get into detail with that. Try not to skimp out. Basically, the only questions that are like a sentence or two long and responses are like one of them, and you'll see it when we get to it. Other than that, you need to write. Now, getting to question 3. Question 3 wants you to take everything from question 2 and maybe a little bit from question 1, but mainly question 2, and basically say, okay, because of what I'm planning to teach, right? And because of what I know about my students and their background, here's why I'm teaching what I'm teaching. Here's how it connects to theory or research. Here's how it connects to the students' dispositions. You don't need to cite in your edTPA. You don't get bonus points for that. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of space. So I recommend not doing it. Theory can be very straightforward. I'll give you guys some that I'll give you all some that I think are just very straightforward. And I recommend picking 1 to 2 theorists. You don't get more points for using more theory. You get your points are for using it correctly, right? So let's see. We have some theorists and theories are Jean Piaget. We have schema theory, Vygotsky, zone of proximal development. We also have the theory of constructivism. We have social learning theory, collaborativism. What's another one? We said schema. I tend to have people stray away from behaviorism. One of the very first things one of my very first education professors taught me in my very first year of school, like, gosh, so long ago, was that behaviorism has an interesting base, but that should not be like what you're doing your entire lesson on, right? So those are some really great ones. I think she might have added an interesting one. I want to see if we can find it. Because there was one that was new to me. I don't know if we mentioned it. Let's see. All right. I don't think we used that one. That's fine. Oh, this is one though. Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. That's another great one to use about different learning styles. So when you mention the theory, describe what the theory is, how it relates to your students, and how it relates to the lessons that you're teaching. This question you want to be very detailed because you want to explain the justifications behind everything that you're doing. And I also want you to start honing in on mentioning a little, almost excessively, critical thinking and higher order thinking. Bloom's taxonomy, that's what I forgot. Bloom's taxonomy is another theory. So you want to be mentioning critical thinking, and you also want to be mentioning the term learning objective. Keep mentioning those things, but also mention it with reason. Don't just throw it in there. Or 3B, this is where we get to supports for the whole class, specific learners, specific groups. It doesn't just have to be students that are classified. It can also be students that, they just have different needs, but it's not an IEP. So this is saying, what are the strategies that you'll use to better help the students learn and pick up on the concepts that they need to, right? But, and then what are the supports that connect with this? Word walls, we'll use the anchor charts, and why do the students benefit? We have critical thinking questions. We might do cooperative learning. Actually, that's a theory as well, cooperative learning theory. Cooperative learning where the students are paired together, right? So what are like the strategies and supports that you can use to spruce up the activities to make it make more sense for the students? 3C is typically a short one. What are the common developmental approximations or misconceptions? So this is literally what it says. What are things that the students can misunderstand? Remember, kids are kids. They will misunderstand the things that you think are so straightforward. So that could be when you're talking about main characters, maybe they confuse a main character with a secondary character, right? Maybe they like, again, hyper focus, like this person said, on specific details, but not the details that they need to know or should be focusing on. Maybe they're comparing and contrasting societies and history, and they mix up specific key details relating to like the class of the citizens, right? That was when we had it, I think a year ago with a client. So you just want to kind of list these out and then state specific activities that could be of benefit, right? That's it. Question 4. So this is where we get into the language function. With this is the only question basically that's a sentence long. So your language function doesn't have to just come from this chart. They just give you ideas for it, right? So if in this case we said her language function was identify, that's it, only one, and it's the same, like you don't change it. 4B wants you to identify a key learning task. So this is basically name one activity. You could do 2, but name an activity, not the whole lesson, just, an activity that utilizes your language function. So I get it. I get that there's so many different ways. You're not talking about the whole lesson. You're going to say, okay, well, there is one instance when we're working as a group, or the students are in pairs at the end of lesson 1, and they have to identify this, this, and this together. And you're going to go into detail into what that looks like and why they're doing it, and how that even helps them meet the learning objective. 4C is additional language demands. So this is where it mentions the discourse and syntax again. And this is where I say just do discourse. If you want to stress yourself out, you can do syntax, but that's only if you want to stress yourself out. So with this, you're going to, this is all about language, not the content. So you're going to name the keywords that the students need to know, why they need to know them, how that'll help them meet the learning objective. And you're going to name the opportunities where the students are having discussions or utilizing discourse. Yeah, so you're saying what they will be doing regarding this and why or how why and how this will be implemented as well, right? For example, the students will have discourse when they respond to questions during the reading group discussions. As I ask comprehension questions, the students will need to respond to show understanding and discourse use, right? We gave some more examples. This usage of discourse will support the student's ability to use the language function and meet the learning objective. Another thing we said was that turn and talks will require the students to verbally identify and discuss the key details of the story, and that the students need to meet the language demand by responding promptly and clearly, right? So language demand is a demand. These are things that they need to do to utilize their language properly. Supports. These are things that support the student in using these demands. Okay, so they have vocabulary terms. What supports them with those vocabulary? Sentence starters, sentence frames, word walls, anchor charts. Like they have a language function. And since it's identification, we have anchor charts in this case. Anchor charts, visuals, very clear, explicit examples, of how to identify what identification is, right? To support students with discourse, again, sentence frames, guiding questions, scaffolding, right? So how are you going to support the students with language, and maybe even which groups of students will be supported? Of course, mention your language objectives as well. And then question 5. You guys are at the end of the most difficult commentary. These are all about your assessments. So you want to mention your formal and informal assessments for each lesson. This is also why I only want you to do 3 lessons, right? Because then it would be very annoying to do all 5 days. Mention your assessments, why they're important, and what the assessments will show, like how it shows that the students can comprehend or compose or whatever it needs to show, how it shows that they use the strategy. So we went lesson by lesson, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. We stated what the informal was, what they need to do with that, what the formal was, and how that shows the objective. And finally, B is about modifications and supports. So for the different groups of students you have in your class, how can you support your learners in, how can you best support them in, this is how you know I'm going to have to take a break for a couple minutes. Because I'm going for at least, an hour or so. So yeah, I'm going to take a break after this. So 5B is all about the assessments and how you can modify them for different learners in your classroom so that they can still complete it, but complete it to the best of their ability. Adding on questions, taking off questions, giving more time, translating, providing a dictionary, providing extra visual supports, whatever you need. Explain what the supports would be and why, right? So that was all of task 1. I highly recommend doing task 1 first. That's your planning commentary. And really just take your time with it. Go super, super in depth with it. And I think that will just help you so much to do it to the best of your ability, and to really be successful with it. So it will be frustrating, it will be annoying, but I want you to keep going and explain like you've never explained before. All right, so now we are going to focus on task 2.